All right, go ahead.
Hi, this is Tess Whitehurst, and this is Your Superior Self.
Tess, self-love. I am excited to talk about this. Thank you for joining the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, your new book, The Self-Love Superpower, The Magical Art of Approving of Yourself no matter what. Um, Talk about that. Like what sparked that?
So I had a birthday where I was very sad. I often had birthdays where I was very sad. I didn't
Mhm.
know why, but I just kind of felt depressed on my birthdays. I've recently figured that out, but this year I had a bad birthday and I mentioned it on my podcast. And then there was an email we received or a message we received about how someone was surprised that I would have a bad day
Mm.
since I had written a number of books about magical and spiritual living and, have guided meditations on YouTube. And so I realized I had kind of left out a really big, important part of my spiritual path in my writings and work. And that was the imperfect nature of the spiritual path, like the way that we're all making mistakes and feeling having ups and downs all the time, and learning to love ourselves through that and learning to create space in order to hear our intuition, to have patience with that process, to have compassion with ourselves through it. That's really the spiritual path. The spiritual path is not arriving at this place where you're always happy.
Isn't that like the
Yeah.
fallacy of it though? They think like
Yeah.
spiritual enlightenment is it, the finish line, and then you're done, right? Like
Yeah. That's it. You win.
no, it's
Yeah.
like an ever going thing, right? Like there's always a next level, I feel like.
Oh, yeah. If we're still here, right? If
Mhm.
we're, I mean, there must be more to learn and more ways to evolve if we're still alive on Earth as a human.
All right. Um, let's talk about that, like your spiritual awakeness, your spirituality. Like, have you always been, pursuing that? Like, what did your earlier life look like, and when did you become like fascinated with consciousness, with self-love, with everything that you're about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, when I was in high school, I found Buddhism. I lived in a small town, like a rural town where it was before everyone had the internet. And the only kind of alternative spirituality I could find was Buddhism. But before that, my mom took me to church and she had a real like she had a deep fear of possession and Satan and demons. And I just absorbed this terror of being possessed, of being a bad person. I mean, going to hell. And then when I was, I guess, like maybe it was my first year of high school when I became an atheist. So then I became an atheist, and that was so liberating. But I think I still just always had this like fascination, this draw. And when I read about, oh, you know what? Actually, my mom had she got a Buddhist book in the mail. It was like a book club. And I read it. It was the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And then I was like, I love this. And so then I started meditating when I was in high school. And then after that, when I was in acting school in Pasadena, California, then I had access to bookstores and I learned about all number of spiritualities after that.
Atheism. That's pretty. I mean, for a young girl, I mean anybody young, right? Like, I mean, I grew up in a small town, right? And so, I mean, we all get programmed at a very early age to, I think, not well, maybe not all of us, but a majority of us get programmed to go into church and go to Sunday school and do these things, and it's all fear based, right? We go do these things because we are fearful we won't go to heaven.
Yeah.
Um, so atheism, was that kind of like a revolting type of selection for you? Was it like I'm going to be atheist because I don't believe anything that you're saying and I think that there's something different out there? Or maybe
Yeah.
there's not nothing out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was at a point where my mom was kind of like laying off the spirituality for just a brief moment before she dove back in, but she was laying off of it for a minute. And my dad's always been like pretty supportive of me thinking for myself. So I don't think I didn't feel like I was rebelling against them at that time, but I did feel like I was rebelling against like just the mainstream
The
sort of
machine,
message. Yeah,
the
the machine.
machine. Yeah.
And yeah, totally. And also, and against, I mean, it felt like a liberating thing to be like, not having to worry about an afterlife,
Hmm.
about any sort of invisible. It's just that it had been such an uncomfortable thing
Is
to
that
me. So
the same? I guess it's not. What is it the same? I guess maybe it's not the same thing as nihilism, right? Like a nihilist believes there is no meaning, right? Like there is no meaning to this.
yeah, I think I mean, that's my understanding of nihilism is something like that.
So an
Like,
atheist
no,
doesn't believe in an afterlife or anything. They believe that an atheist, and I could be wrong. I don't. I'm just assuming that they believe that there is no afterlife nor God, right?
yeah, I mean, I think that some atheists have like some agnosticism in there, which is like, I
Mm.
just don't know. Um, I think technically atheism means I don't believe in God. I believe there is no God.
Well, isn't like most fear-based communities who hear the word atheism, they automatically believe that they're Satanists and like they
Oh,
worship, like I feel like
yeah.
a lot of people who, because there's a lot of scientists that are atheists,
Yeah.
especially
Like
that are
same
rooted.
category,
Yeah.
like just
It's
very
not,
bad.
they just don't know, right? Like they're, they just don't know because of their scientific roots. So when did you, I mean, what is your belief system now? Do you believe in higher levels of consciousness, universe, cosmos, God? What do you believe in
Yeah,
now?
I mean, I feel very pro science and really respectful and understanding of atheism and agnosticism. I also feel a sense that it is inspiring to me to connect with infinity, which
Hmm.
is consciousness, like infinite. I think of it like infinite consciousness, which also we all are a part of. Like if we really think about what is it like to have consciousness, it's neutral. I mean, things arise within it, feelings and thoughts and opinions and pain or pleasure or things we're seeing or just imagining. I mean, things arise within the consciousness, but the consciousness itself is infinite and universal. And connecting with that spacious sort of openness, to me, that is a kind of theism. It's like something that is bigger than my human self that I am one with, and that there are different ways to access that. But as humans, it's also difficult for us to understand, to contemplate, to like hold it in our consciousness, this idea of an infinite consciousness. So if there are different ways that we're able to connect with that, or different visions of the divine, or different names for the divine that help us to connect with different aspects of the divine, then that is okay. I think it's just, for me, it's the underlying awareness of that infinite consciousness.
When did you like become so in coherence with that, right? Like so you get from atheism, you start reading a lot of different books,
Yeah.
spirituality, Buddhism. Like, was it then? Like, do you ever have like an experience with consciousness, a higher levels of consciousness, the oneness? Do you have that, like that kind of, from believing to knowing?
Yeah.
Like what did
Yeah.
that
I
look
mean,
like?
so there have been moments, like specific significant moments. I wouldn't call any of them like an enlightenment moment, because I kind of don't like, I just made a video about how I don't think it's helpful for us to have that concept like we're talking about, like
Hmm.
you did it, you won. But I have had moments that were especially opening. And one of them you may have read about in my book was when I was on acid,
Hmm.
and I was in the car. My friend was driving. Did you get to that part yet?
Yep, yep, yep.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I was just really feeling very bad. I mean, I was so identified with my thoughts, and my thoughts were incessant, they were negative, they were self-condemning, self-critical, and it was so uncomfortable. I just couldn't sit with it. And then I now think of it as my higher self showed me how to allow those thoughts to be there, not fight them, not argue with them, just let them be there. But then to realize that's not you. Like you don't have to identify. I feel like that was a moment that was really formative for me when I just saw that dynamic and understood that dynamic where it was like you could have a real uncomfortable monologue in your head. But if you realize that's not who you are, your infinite consciousness, then it becomes so much less uncomfortable. It just becomes more bearable.
Yeah, and I think in the book you name it the ego, right? Like everyone know. Maybe some people on the show haven't really identified that ego separate from who they are. Really, I mean, what we are truly, because it's hard, right? Because I in a couple of recent episodes we talk about like how do you communicate with that self, higher self, and for me it looks like meditation, quieting, sitting still, be still and know that I am God, right? Like silence it all out, silence your mind, and you start tapping into that source, that consciousness, right? Like, I don't know who said this, but they were like, silence is the voice of God or something like that. Like, you're not going to hear a lot of the times enlightenment, or what people term as enlightenment, is not like some loud voice coming to you and giving you a message. Usually it's very very subtle, right? Like very subtle images or downloads or visions that happen through meditation or flow states or whatever it is that you love. And it's kind of like your job, really, right, to kind of decipher that, whatever that looks like for you, and apply it to your life, because you can always apply that message to your life directly. I have experienced that, right? Like I don't know, for a lot of people, some people who have the five clairs, if you want to call it that, that have a lot of psychic abilities or things like that, that can do a whole lot of different things that I can't do with their intuition, might get different messages. But for me, and I think for most people who struggle with, like, the left brain coming in and saying, well, this isn't right, this isn't true, like this is just you making up stories, or you're just making up that voice, or you're just making up these images just because you want to feel like there is a message for you from the universe. And you kind of got to let that go. You kind of got to like check that ego, like you were talking about in your experience in the book, and kind of just know that, through your heart, through your right here, this heart center, that you also got to like kind of trust that too. Like, and I've been struggling with trust, not just with externals during my life, but with myself as well, right? You got to trust that higher self, that you're getting these I call them divine images or divine connections in divine timing in your life. And that's when you can apply it. Like, it doesn't hit you right away. Like when you walk away from that meditation, it kind of like, it's like a day later, you're walking, or you're in a situation, you're kind of like, go back to that meditation, you're like, holy crap, like this is what that meant, right? Like this is why I got that. And I didn't mean to go on a rant, but it's just like,
oh no, yeah. That's interesting. So when you meditate, are you saying that you sometimes like see images or hear words and then they have significance for you later?
Yeah. So like I go places. Like I'll listen to a beach meditation, and then all of a sudden I'm at the beach, and then I'm sitting on the beach, and I'll have like, obviously, not obviously, because people don't know what is going on with me in my meditations, but I will have like visions or like conversations with whatever, either Jesus or God or Buddha or whomever, a higher, ascended master, if you want to call it that. And it usually is pretty enlightening for me. Maybe not in that moment, but at some point during the day or the next following day, I'll have an experience that relates directly to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
What does it look like for you?
Well, so I think for I sometimes will tap into intuition in a similar way where I'll listen deeply and and receive sort of downloads of information or words or images. With the daily meditation, which I recommend to all of your listeners and everybody to do daily meditation, that to me is a similar thing that I was talking about with my hallucinogenic experience. You definitely don't need to do hallucinogens in order to have that. And it is shifting. It's like water dripping on a stone. It's teaching you, your mind, your spirit to identify with infinity rather than the human monologue. So
Mm.
it's like the ego I talk about in the book is, I think, a good definition for the ego is the illusion of separation. So we all have that. It's just a part of being human. It appears that I'm separate from you and I'm separate from the sky and my cat. But in reality, we're all interconnected, and we are interconnected with pure spirit and consciousness. So when we meditate, that bringing your mind back to the breathing, like just that, like, okay, now I'm breathing in, now I'm breathing out. And now my mind is wandering. Oops, okay, I'll bring it back to breathing in, breathing out, feeling my weight on the cushion or the floor. Like that is that, yeah, my voice is there, my thoughts are there, but let me just keep bringing it back just to being here in this space, listening to silence, listening to my breath. And then over time, that puts you in a space where, yeah, you have a human experience, you have ups and downs, but you know who you really are, which is infinity.
Mm. So it's so powerful. Like, cause like I want to know that. I want to have a knowing, right? Like I have all
Yeah.
of these. I have all these. Like I can read your book. I can read 1,000 other books, and hear about or read about people's experiences with consciousness, with this feeling of oneness, right? Like this, they somehow float over their bodies, and they can see their body, and they can see themselves as everything. The mountains, the river, the sun, the beach, just everything. The sand is the water, the water is the sand kind of moment where everything is connected. But it's like, I guess that knowing for me, like that's where the trust comes in for me, right? And like reading your book about self-love, and then reading some other pieces of work like Michael J. Rhodes. I don't know if you ever heard of him or not. I just found him. He
Mm-hmm.
talks about, like, the same thing you're talking about, like having an unconditional love for yourself regardless of
Mm-hmm.
what happens. And it's hard because a lot of people are their worst enemies. You're talking about the ego. You have some
Mm-hmm.
really good examples of that in the book, throughout your journey, where you're just harping on things. You're dumb, you're stupid, you're not good enough, blah blah blah. And then, like, you go to work, and you you hear it from your boss, and you mess up on like in a project or something, or you mess up in your relationships or whatever, and you're like hating on yourself, throwing shade on yourself the entire time. And this guy's like, yeah, no, I love myself totally unconditionally. No matter what
Yeah.
it is that I do, I always forgive myself. And I always think, I know that I'm a metaphysical, multi-dimensional being. And that is just so magnificent in itself. How can I hate that? How can I,
Right.
like,
Yeah.
I mean, you put a lot of
Yeah.
examples in the book as well. I mean, was it, when did you get to that point? Because I'm just now, like, starting, like, I'm 38. I'm just starting to unconditionally love myself.
Oh yeah, no, I feel like I also, I mean, it's an ongoing journey. Like I say in the book, it's spiraling. It's not a straight path to the top of the mountain. So I had different degrees of it, but I feel like it has been in the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years that, and I'm 44, where I'm really, starting to see, because I think a good gauge is when you think of like your kids, like you have kids. I saw your picture, I saw your bio. And so like you think of your kids, you don't think, oh, I would love you only you made this mistake today, or I would love you only you don't look exactly, your eyes aren't pretty enough or something. You would
Yeah.
never. And like that's that same way that I think when we can think of loving ourselves, like cultivating a love that is like, it doesn't have anything to do with conditions, because I think it's also confusing because the word love, I mean, our culture in general, we have a lot of like
There's a
a
lot of
lot of,
boxes. There's a lot of
yeah,
boxes.
boxes, messages we get. But then the word love, I think, can be a little confusing because when we think of loving a person, that is just like I want you to know I love you no matter what you look like, no matter what mistakes you make, I love you. We just feel that unconditional love when we really love someone. But then we also use the word to say like I love your jacket, I love that
Mhm.
t-shirt, and it's like that is totally another thing. That is a preference, that's an opinion. And so noticing like that is not like do you love your body is not like the same as do you love that t-shirt. It's like do you love your daughter? Yes, you love your daughter no matter what she looks like this is our bodies are these loyal beings that are taking care of us, taking us from one place to another, doing everything they possibly can to support our life as a human on earth. So for us to cultivate a love of our bodies, a love of our soul, our uniqueness, like how we're showing up in the world, even when we make mistakes. And I feel like thinking about again, like a daughter or son or a partner or brother or sister, if sometimes when they make mistakes or they have imperfections, like so-called imperfections, it's like it doesn't make us love them more, but it does help us feel that love. Like
Mhm.
it's like opens your heart to them more in a way. And I feel like we can, and I have, and I love that I have gotten to a point where I have opened my heart to myself in that way.
Mm. What was it like that was limiting yourself from loving yourself?
I think that a big key for kind of, I mean, I always have thought I valued the concept of self-love, and I feel like I did get closer and closer and learn a lot of things all along the way. But I think I really started feeling like I was cultivating it in a deep way, this unconditional love, when I discovered the anti-diet movement, which I know you've had a guest that was talking about the
Mhm.
anti-diet movement, because I had felt so like I just didn't realize like how much I had internalized this idea of how important it is how my body looks and how much it weighs, and then like how good of a person I am based on how healthy I eat. And when I learned about the anti-diet movement and I started deprogramming myself from that hypnotism,
Mm.
it helped me, I think, in other ways to be like, how else can I unconditionally love and support myself and let myself be who I am and look how I look?
There's so many programs. Like there's just so many programs that
Yeah.
we're so unconscious of. Like it just uh like and we don't realize it what's in our like the shadow, right? Like what Carl Jung Carl
Yeah.
Jung used to call the shadow. We don't even know what's there, what the
Yeah.
programs are, because we're conscious, like that 1% of consciousness that we are during the day, or what we are right now. We have no idea what lies in there, right? And so it's like through dreams, it's through meditation, it's through flow states. It's some people, it looks like psychedelics. I mean, a lot of people work through their shadow through psychedelics because that's when it comes up. That's when
Mhm.
you deal with the shadow, and you got to deal with it. But there's so much liberation in that once you start seeing the programs and you start realizing what they are. I mean, I think it, like, I was reading a book and they were like, some guy was questioning his livelihood, and he was like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I going to work? What is the reason? Why am I going to work? Fear is the reason
Mm.
why you're going to work. What do you fear? And he's like, what? I don't fear. I'm not going to work because of fear. Yes, you are, because you're going and you're checking in because you're fearful that you're not going to have a paycheck, that you can't support your family, that you can't do this and this and that. And you're not trusting the being in which you are, like that. You have to, and that's where trust comes in, like knowing, right? Like to unconditionally trust yourself is showing up every day knowing that your higher self is going to take care of you and that you're going to get through it, and the universe is going to show you your way. Like you can't just be like, all right, I quit. Like, I'm not, I'm going to quit my job tomorrow and blah, blah, blah. You have to trust that the way, whatever that looks like, will come, and you keep showing up for that, regardless of what it is. And that's like, that was my biggest epiphany, was like fear. It's everything that I've done was based off of fear of not having enough, not doing enough, not being successful enough. And like I was, when I first started the podcast, it was all about trying to be successful, trying to get the downloads, trying to market it, try to put it in this box and say, this is what it is. Fear, because I wasn't good enough. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it was driving me, and it drives a lot of people, fear. But then when you step back and you look at it and you look at society and you're like, man, everything is driven by fear, everything. And that's when you kind of step back from that illusion, which is our reality right now, which our society is an illusion because it is driven off of fear. And you kind of step back and you realize, I am, again, a multidimensional, phenomenal being, and this is going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I could perish tomorrow, and I will be somewhere else that is going to be magnificent, and it's going to be a learning, experience for myself, and I'm going to be able to recollect, and I'm going to be able to, as you put it, infinity, right? Be infinite. There is no
Mm-hmm.
beginning, there is no end. Like continue on this path of higher consciousness. Does that make sense?
Yeah. 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 And also, I think I was feeling from what you were saying, like when you love and approve of yourself unconditionally, then that feels easy. It's like, I don't have, I mean, I will go to work because it shifts the reason you go to work. Like, I'm going to go to work because at this moment, this is the best option for me to help take care of myself and my family. And I love myself. And I don't have to do anything. I don't have to have my life look any particular way in order to have my life be valuable, to have it be, to just be worthy of love, to have my life amount to something, like that whole idea of amounting to something. It's like it already does. You already do when you
Exactly.
love yourself and when you know that. And then that is like, you will listen deeply to what you need and to be kind to yourself. And maybe sometimes you'll forget, and then you'll be kind to yourself when you remember. And then the more you can learn to do that and listen to yourself and take care of yourself, then your life begins to shift and not be guided by fear.
Sure. And I should totally put a disclaimer out. I don't want people to go quit their jobs, but this guy had realized that he hated his job, and he was like, why am I doing this? Who am I?
Yeah, but he brought consciousness to it.
Yes. Yes.
And then he was able to shift it, not probably necessarily by quitting right away, but it's like just by seeing, oh, this is my internal motivation. I don't want to be motivated by that. So let me shift that, and then take steps in a healthy way that doesn't jeopardize my livelihood. But you can right away shift your inner environment, even if it doesn't make sense to shift everything in the outer environment right away.
Yeah. But then again, it's like the ego, right? The ego fears off the fear. And so, like, let's say you're doing a job that you hate, and you're like, you can't get out of that rut. And it's like, why am I continuing? But you see throughout the day, like how your mind is reacting from the fear. Like
Yeah.
I'm never going to be able to go back to school. I'm never going to be able to alter, change my path because of I'm not good enough, or you're not good enough, or, you don't have enough money, or blah, blah, blah. You got to step back and say, this is fear. Like, this is just me. Fear is the whip. It is cracking the
Uh-huh.
whip on me. And once you step back and you realize this, it's all an illusion, right? Like, you are greater than what you think you are. Like, you are 100% greater, this greater being that is right here having this experience. And trust yourself, like 100%. Like trust, go sign up for a class, or do something different, and see how the universe responds. And then, like when you were talking about in your book, um when you start loving yourself unconditionally and you start having that self-love, like I've noticed it for myself, just by having that love for myself, and like, just speaking to myself and just pumping myself up and just loving myself, not the emotion, but like love is the power of creation. When I do that, I notice things in my life change. Like my energy's changing, right? So like things are vibrating differently. So like things are happening. Like my wife took the trash out the other my wife has never taken the trash out ever. And I come home from work and there's trash. I mean, all of the trash is out on the curb. I'm like, I have to chalk this up to me loving myself because this would have never ever happened. Like
Wow.
seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, you write about it in
There's
the book,
proof
right?
right
Like you
there.
write about it in the book, right? Like in your experience, like in your energy field, have you noticed things change when you start loving yourself more?
Yeah. Everything shifts. I mean, everything is easier. Everything feels safer. And it does like it is that process too. Like when you were talking about the fear, I think I mean, self-love is also noticing like, okay, there's fear. This is shadow work too. Like there's fear that I'm identifying, but that isn't me. I am not that fear. It's just the rising there. And then that gives you so much more agency. It opens up so many more possibilities. But in general, yeah, self-love helps to shift. It puts you in a more receptive state so that it's easier for blessings to flow to you. It's easier for the
Mm.
universe with whom you are one to come in and co-create with you.
Besides the acid trip, have you done anything like any type of breath work or meditations where you were uh, conscious of the oneness or in unity with it? Or is it just limited to that one experience?
Oh yeah, no, I mean I feel like always meditation, every time I go outside walking in nature, it's more subtle now. Like that was a situation where it was an emergency. So shifting out of that discomfort was like really noticeable. Like, oh, this is very different. There is much more space and freedom here. But then over time, it becomes to me, my experience of spirituality is this it's very subtle and it's incremental, but it's consistently opening up more and more joy, more and more freedom by just simply, I mean, it's very simple. It's not, I mean, yes, I have experiences like you where I see images or receive messages or downloads, but I feel like the real gold of the spiritual path is the everyday simplicity of listening to silence or looking at the sky and identifying with the mystery, like
Mm.
what is this, what is going on, what is going on here, who am I? And then it's like the answer is infinity. The answer is the mystery. It's something that transcends our human logic, but we can still, through meditation, through spending time in nature, through setting the intention, we can still sense it. Even if we can't understand it consciously or explain it consciously, we can sense that space, that oneness, that possibility.
Yeah, it's so hard to describe. Like you can't even name it. Like I even hate to say like the word God because it's like the word itself is just limiting to that,
Yeah.
right? And like
Mm-hmm.
and it's crazy because like you know how you sit in like silence or you calm your thoughts and you have this awareness, right? Like you have this because I'm just new to this idea of like, you know, I was listening to was Suzanne Giesman and Paul Selig's new book and Suzanne was like, you know, she channels an entity named Sanaya, and Sanaya, she came through, and or the collective came through and was like, um, you're not the ocean, and you're not the wave, you are the ocean waving, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
each person is the ocean waving, just an individual consciousness point of that. And I was like, okay, that's cool. Like, and then like I was reading Paul Selig stuff, and then like it started referring to us as that universal consciousness of like this inside of me, my higher self, everything that I am, my collective consciousness is Christ consciousness, essentially, right? Like that. And I was like taken back. I was like blown. I was like, what? Like, I've because I started having meditations about, you know, having having conversations with Jesus, and like, you know, obviously I grew up with a Christian background, and he would say, you know, I would say, you know, people listen to the show are like, stop talking about this, Trey, but I'm going to say it anyway. Is like I would say I love you, and he says, well, if you love me, then you love yourself. And I would, okay. And then like I never really got that. I never really understood that. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just like, you've always worshiped me. You never really loved me. You were because of fear. It was a fear-based love. It was kind of like, if you want to go to heaven, you're going to love me. But I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know how to do that. Like I know how to worship you. I know how to say ask for forgiveness, but I don't know how to love you. But his whole message to me was like, him and I are not different. We are the same.
Yeah.
We are the same. And I
Yes.
didn't know what that meant. I was just kind of like, oh, well, he's just another human being, just like me. Maybe that's what he meant. But it wasn't that at all.
Mm-mm.
It was the entity, the consciousness that flows through my body, that moves, that moves this hand, that moves this mouth, that flows through my mouth, through this brain is this consciousness that is something that doesn't originate in the brain, originates, who knows where. It is the universe, the cosmos, and it's a part of my being, and my soul, my entity, my spirit is of that. And when
Mm-hmm.
that bomb dropped, oh, I was just like, I'm still kind of dealing with it, because I think
Ah.
I'm still dealing with it, because it's like going to the next level each time that I contemplate this. It's like, so if I'm that, and you and I are connected to that, is it really like, when I'm sitting and going back to my point, I'm sorry, I'm like going around,
No,
the
this
city
is
block here.
fascinating.
Like, when I quiet my mind enough, and I am that awareness, where there's no thought, there is nothing but silence, and it's pure, like, just awareness. Am I that in you too? Right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, like, so take this out of it. Take this conditioned personality, take these thoughts, these experiences, these life experiences, and take this consciousness now out. And am I that in you? You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like, that's the thing that
Yes.
I'm struggling with right now. Cause it's like,
Yes.
it's crazy. Like, it's just, like, this could be me over there looking at myself, talking to myself. It's like, how freaky that is. I don't know. A lot of people
Yeah.
might think I'm nuts right now, but it's like,
No.
I have these thoughts. I'm like, what if that's me? What if that's like I just don't, because I've had my life experiences as Trey, as I've had that conditioning. I have this experience of separateness. This is my body. But when I leave that body, I expand more, from what the mystics say, and from what Buddhism says, and what a lot of the great ascended masters say. If I am that, then could I, or could my being project itself in another person? I don't know. It's crazy. Like, my mind
Yeah.
is exploding on some of this stuff over here.
Well, because I think that the spiritual path, for me, I think it's helpful to think of a duality, that there are two levels of reality. And one is that I'm a human named Tess, and you're a human named Trey, and we are in different bodies in different states. And then there's a truer, much truer eternal reality, which is that we're all one consciousness. It's the same consciousness, that's divine consciousness. So I feel like that's what we're doing when we're meditating, when we're spending quiet time in nature, when we're doing shadow work, just any kind of way that we're getting in touch with spirit, is we're putting energy and attention into that side of the duality, that true part. And then we can be in the world. We can be like, oh yeah, I'm Tess, and
Mhm.
this is my life. This is my job. This is how my hair looks, and I'm gonna brush it. Like, we can deal with the day-to-day stuff, but it feels more fun because it's like, okay, it's kind of like, oh, let's play at being this today. There's not real deep seriousness to it. If I feel heartbroken, it's like it's in the context of infinity and eternity. And it also helps us to have empathy with others. But it's really interesting to me that you're saying that, because I was just talking to my boyfriend about that when we were at a restaurant, and I had read I don't remember where, New York Times, Vice, something, this article about how we didn't miss, like, during the pandemic, it wasn't that we missed restaurants because we missed the food. It was that we missed looking at people. Like, that's why we like to go to restaurants, so we can kind of like look around and see who else is there. And I was talking to him about, like, yeah, that is so great, because it is kind of like looking at different versions of yourself. Like, oh, there there I am, and there I am, and there I am. And what I wonder what my life is like in that reality. Is this an interesting way to kind of contemplate the
Sure.
consciousness split into this prismatic like human experience,
It kind of blows my mind though, because like when I say things like, I want to do this or I want to do that, and or I want to be that, I'm going back to school. And when I graduate, I want to, do different things in psychology, and I want to, I want this podcast to, and a lot, and I'm struggling with that because it's a lot of ego stuff too, right? Like I want to be able, and people say, or I believe, like I'm trying to decipher what is truth for me. And I hear a lot of people say we're here to create, and we're here on this in this reality to create, be creators. And like you hear a lot of different things about, well, if I am that consciousness, if I am the I am, then how can I not manipulate reality for myself and create the reality that I want? And I'm just like, well, you know what? Let's go hit this home run. Let's hit this grand slam, to ultimately know that I am the I am, and create a reality that's going to shake me to my core and say, yeah, buddy, you're that, right? So, but I don't know if that's the ego. I don't know if that's the ego saying, well, let's do this, and we want this, or is it because the more that I find myself loving myself more, like unconditionally, and trusting myself unconditionally, the more I let go of the rope. Like the
Mm-hmm.
more I let go of that, oh, I have to, um, that reality that I want to change it into. I let go of that more, and I'm more in the moment, and I'm more like I'm enjoying this because I know what it is. Like I know that the society that is surrounding me right now is nothing but illusion. Like that reality a lot of people are living that are still kind of sleeping to, um that is not truth, right? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
not my truth. So the more that I, going back to your book, the, the self-love superpower, the more that I do that, the more that I let go of the ego, the more I let go of the reality that I need to have. Because right now, in this moment, like there's not a better feeling in the world knowing that we are higher beings of consciousness, and that we're here right now experiencing this flow of this art, right? Like you and I having a conversation, these people listening to this conversation probably wondering what the hell we're talking about, but but there's nothing better because it's that's creation, right? Like
Yeah.
that is ultimately, to feel, that's freedom,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
I
know.
think, yeah, you're right on with that because I think it's when we concentrate on that feeling that we want, manifesting the feelings we want rather than the way we want it to exactly look like this is how many downloads I get on my podcast every week exactly. When it's more like, oh, what is the feeling there? Oh, it's the feeling of expansion and communication and joy and connecting with creativity and the divine. Then it's like you're letting yourself co-create with yourself. It's like your infinite self is co-creating with your finite self. And when you have both, when you have like, yeah, I know I'm an ego, but I'm also regularly remembering I'm also infinity, then it's this beautiful dance.
Mm. Yeah, it's a dance for sure. I mean, that is reality, really. I mean, not reality, but it's like what you're in. Like this reality that I'm in is a dance. It's like surfing. It's like, but it feels so real, right? Like people can
Yeah.
attest to this. Like you start going through some shit, and then it's like you get locked into the moment, and you're like, you're lost. You forgot that self. You forgot the higher self. Now you think you're the individualized conscious. Yeah, now I think I'm Trey Downs. Now I think I am my my I think I am in my environment, everything. Why is this happening to me? What is going on?
Mm-hmm.
And until I can step back and kind of recollect myself and then remember, um it's like, man, that felt real. Like that felt
Mm-hmm.
like really really real. And it's, I'm telling you, until you can unconditionally trust that higher self and know that it has your best interest, like regardless, even if it's a hard interest, like it is, there's a lesson to be learned. Like even if, like, let's say, I mean, I don't know, let's say I say, all right, I'm going to unconditionally trust myself, and I am going to put all of that energy into my higher self, and I'm going to trust whatever happens next. And let's say next thing you know, I get fired from my job. Let's just say that happens for you regardless, because that is the unfolding of a cosmic universal plan. That is, now you've accepted this higher being, this challenge from the universe to trust it, because now it's like, okay, you want to trust me, guess what, buddy, we're gonna find out how much you trust me. And sometimes you waver, and sometimes you get back to that spot of, and like, why is this happening to me? Like, what is
Mhm.
going on? But then again, like, unconditionally trusting that the universe has your best interest at heart, and then loving yourself on top of that. Like, there's no other way to come out of it but to be positive, but to be in this deep, like, I don't even know how to explain it, like this deep satisfaction of the moment of like there's nothing that can happen to me. Like, once you realize that this body is like, this body will go one day. Like, everybody has an expiration date, but this energy that I am, this consciousness, is going to live forever. So, like, why not approach life with that love and not be fearful of things, and just see? I think you just open yourself up to more experiences.
Yeah, and then because you will still, I really believe everybody, no matter how much they meditate, they will still experience fear and pain and loneliness, and things will not go exactly the way they want them to. But when we have our practice, when we get in the habit of going into the feelings and going into, hey, this is already happening. This is already what's true. Let me be with it. And let me notice, oh, I feel fear. When you get into the habit of like, oh, here I feel fear. Let me give myself compassion. Let me notice that fear. Let me remind myself that everyone feels afraid sometimes, and then be kind to myself, maybe even put my hand on my heart, on my belly, and send myself love. Like, those kinds of habits help us to enter into the flow so we can make friends with what's happening. It's already happening anyway. We might as
Mm.
well be with what it is. And then that, in my experience, is what helps move situations in a positive direction, or it helps you open up in a way that creates more freedom for you.
I love that. I think because you were talking about hand over the heart, like, you have some exercises in the book, that meditations, right? Like that work with that. Like, um, I really enjoyed the book because of those practical applications that everyone can use. Because I know I need it for myself. It creates like these. I don't know. I know it can be hard for people to start new routines, but I need those type of routines in my life, especially when you get into some funks, right? Like, you feel like you're in a rut, and it's like these things bring you back to that oneness, right? Like, I know for me, in the morning I have to meditate or run, either one of the two, and so that way I can kind of set the day on a positive note and know that, reconnect with that. And then I try to do it at night before I fall asleep, just kind of reconnect. But these techniques that you talk about, these techniques that we talk about, they remind you of your higher being. Because if you don't do these things, if you don't read these books, or if you don't meditate, or you eat healthy, or whatever you want, whatever works for you, you kind of fall back asleep.
Yeah, and I think that you and I, people who are interested in evolving and shifting, what we're doing is we're looking to see, how can I shift my energy in a way that will open me up to new feelings or experiences, or more possibilities, more opportunities. So things like meditating or practicing self-compassion, which is something I talk about in the book that I learned from another book by Dr. Kristen Neff. Have you ever read her?
Mm-mm,
Or
mm-mm.
I really recommend her book to everybody. It's called Self-Compassion: The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself. And I talk about her, one of the core mindfulness exercises that she talks about in that book, which is when you notice yourself suffering in any way, fear, self-criticism, even like hunger or impatience, that you stop and notice. And that's placing your hand on your heart, sending yourself love, and noticing. And she has four things she says, which she counsels you to say, which are, this is a moment of suffering. So that's like just acknowledging, here it is, I'm suffering. This is a moment of suffering. And then suffering is a part of life. So then we remember, because that, I think that's a cause of suffering often, is that we think, what's my problem? Like, I should be past this by now. Or why are all my friends on Instagram having a great day, obviously from their picture, and I'm not, because something's wrong with me and I'm the only one suffering. It's just not true. Everyone suffers. So this is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of life. And then may I be kind to myself, and may I give myself the compassion I need.
That's some good stuff right there. What does the Buddha say? Suffering is what, attachment or something like that?
Suffering, all life is suffering. That's the first of the eight Buddhist precepts, which I think all life is suffering. I don't know, maybe it's different in the translation, but I feel like it maybe is more accurate to say all life contains suffering.
Contain suffering. It depends on how you look at it, I guess. Different perspective. Like, I know my suffering was always resulted in my attachments to things.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you kind of step back and you can see that, right? And then just trust yourself. Just trust that things will work out for you. Just like, it doesn't matter what it is. It always, and people say this to me all the time, it always works out. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, man. You don't know what I'm going through. But you know what I mean? Like, everybody does that, but it's like, if you truly do trust yourself, that your higher self, your higher, like your consciousness, whatever you want to call it, source, universe, cosmos, has your best interest at heart, no matter what it is. Like, there's a lesson to be learned. And if you haven't, like, if you don't look back and you say, oh man, that was a good lesson, I'm glad I experienced that, then you're probably not out of it yet. I don't know.
Yeah. What did that make me think of?
I don't know. You had a really, really large insight there. You're getting ready.
The suffering, the attachment. I don't know.
Well, I'll
Well,
tell you what. I became attached to this book, Tess. How can people find out
oh,
more about you, and how can they find the book?
thank you. So my book is just about, oh, it will be out by the time this podcast is out. It's out. It's in all the stores, wherever you buy books. And you can find me at tesswhitehurst.com. From there, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And I also have a podcast called Magic Monday Podcast that I host with my friend Natasha Levenger.
Check it out. Make sure to hit subscribe on that podcast and leave a rating and a review. It helps her scale the podcast. It helps her get this out to those who may need it the most. Tess, I can't thank you enough for joining. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much. This was so fun.